away, down and down onto another vital industrial target, deep inside Hitler's ruthless fortress of Europe. Pick 'em up in Britain and dump 'em down inside Germany. That's the special daylight delivery service that the U.S. 8th Air Force has been running now for more than 14 months. But a lot of work has to be done long before an Air Force can invade Germany, boldly by day. In Britain, the 8th Air Service Command has had to set up a vast and complex system of supply and maintenance and transport and repair. Trucks carry 1.5 million ton-miles of bombs per month. An air transport system hauls 1 million pounds of cargo and ferries 1,200 planes each month. And huge British depots have been taken over to do the mountainous job of keeping the 8th Air Force always ready for combat. Since last May, the average time of repair has been cut from 36 days to 10. But still, every plane that comes to Britain to fight in the Battle of Germany must be modified to meet the changing challenge of enemy tactics. Every bomber must get an average of 400 man-hours of modification. Every fighter plane must get 200. Tanks give fighter planes the longer range they need to do their job. And Tokyo tanks and the wings of bombers stretch the reach of forts and libs. And the new combat crews, too, they have to go through their own kind of modification before they are ready to fight in the Battle of Germany. Bombardiers and navigators, all of them must get a postgraduate course at the combat crew replacement centers. And gunners and radio operators and pilots, they too must learn from veterans the special tricks of combat in the big league. All these things must happen before crews can be briefed for an air invasion of another German target.
For a special effort today. I know that if today's results measure up to your past records, that this target will be demolished. I do want this target hit, and I want it hit hard. Gunners will report to the briefing room for a gunnery briefing. Bombardiers report to Captain Culpepper for target folders and materials. Navigators report to Captain Smith in the navigator's room. That'll be all, gentlemen.
At the briefings, the attack order is transmitted to the combat crews of forts and libs and marauders, and to the pilots of thunderbolts and lightnings, in one complex but synchronized plan of battle. The thrusting lines of attack push always deeper into Germany as the range of fighter protection grows longer and longer. On the eastern knob of Britain, airfields are scattered thick as baseball diamonds in America. And on each U.S. airfield now, forts are lined up, nose to tail for the takeoff. They must surge into the air and form quickly. No waste of precious gas. On other airfields, the liberators taxi out for the takeoff. Some of the same rugged libs of the 8th that went down to Africa and helped the 9th, Hammer Ploeshti. Those liberators are back in the Battle of Germany now, fighting from their British bases. Over Britain, the liberators and fortresses of the 8th Air Force form and climb to the altitude they will need before they go over the top into Germany, each task force to its own target. And always the emphasis is on timing to the split second. In no other form of warfare is timing quite so vital as in this lofty combat where death and destruction ride often at 500 miles per hour. On other airfields, while the fortresses and liberators are climbing to altitude over Britain, the twin-engined Marauders get ready for their part in the Battle of Germany. To win this battle, our first job is to beat the Luftwaffe. And the Marauders have done their share of that job. Their bombs have smashed Nazi airfields, first on shallow penetrations of only 30 miles. But now the Marauders hit Luftwaffe bases 100 miles inside Nazi Europe. The front-line trenches of Hitler's air defense have been driven back and back. In the early raids, the Spitfires of the RAF and now the Lightnings of the 8th AAF have had good hunting against the Jerry planes that are flushed by the Marauders each time they go out. The Spitfires destroyed 100 Huns in a single month on their ramrods with our Marauders. Between July 16th and November 1st, the Marauders hit 88 German targets. Most of the targets were airfields. 4,300 tons of bombs were dropped on their assigned targets. And from all these missions, only 12 Marauders are missing.
R974-122 now at 4635. Thank you. Bomber 16T for tear, now at 4367.
Besides Nazi airfields, the Marauders have hit other special and vital targets. Here, the Marauders are hammering ammunition dumps that the Huns thought they had hidden safely in the woods below. hard and they have hurt him. Their combat crews have learned in battle what they will need to know when the ground invasion comes. And in the air, the Marauders have worked well and often, with the fortresses and liberators as a valued diversion. The same way a smart fighter uses a left jab to open up the other guy for the knockout punch. In and out the Marauders go to soften up the Hun for our heavies. Remember one thing about the Battle of Germany. There are no more air raids on Germany. They are all air battles now. Bomber missions no longer destroy Germany merely on the scale of sabotage. Hitler's fortress is today besieged by bombers. Air battles cover lines of attack longer than the Russian front. They cover an area as vast and as complex as any naval operation that involves a whole fleet of battleships and protecting destroyers and aircraft carriers. And remember this about the record of the 8th Air Force in the Battle of Germany. Not once has any air division or combat wing, or even a single group, been beaten back from any target by German flak or fighter. Sometimes a group that dispatched perhaps 20 planes would have only 2 left at the IP. But those 2 would always fight on through the bombing run and do the job that the group was assigned to do. The air battle for the bombers may begin early as they cross the enemy coast. It may last for 3 hours or more of hammering hell. The rendezvous between fighters and bombers is planned in time to shrink the stretch over which the bombers must fight alone. Welcome to every bomber crew is the sight of the streaking flights of thunderbolts and lightnings. Giving the Hun all the odds of fighting over German territory, still the thunderbolts of the 8th have destroyed the Jerrys at the rate of better than 4 to 1. And given bigger belly tanks for the Thunderbolts, plus the longer range of the Lightnings and the P-51s, the bombers of the 8th will soon have fighter protection over every vital industrial target anywhere inside Germany. Wherever our bombers have fighter cover, there is no weapon yet devised by the Luftwaffe that can keep the forts and libs from doing their job. lie crouched over his bomb sight in the fishbowl nose of a fortress, on him alone is now focused all the work of the hundreds of men and women who built our bombers and our fighter planes. All the thought and planning and effort of the hundreds of men who work in the administration and training and supply of an Air Force. All the work of all these people, plus all the effort and daring of the combat crews, hangs now on the fingers of the bombardier. The strain piles up on him in the brief seconds of the bombing run. Eyes and mind and imagination, too, must concentrate now on your complex gadgets, bombardier. Forget the fighters that queue up to knock you down, and to hell with the flag. Every nerve and muscle must focus now on your target, bombardier, until your bombs are away. Okay, bombardier, your bombs are gone, and you're through working for Uncle Sam for the day. You're working for yourself now, so man those guns, bombardier, and help fight your way home. The bombers of the 8th have pushed on from the early shallow targets in France and on the fringe of Germany, targets vital to Hitler's U-boat warfare. Our bombers since then have smashed synthetic rubber factories, ball bearing factories, all the plants that cripple mechanized warfare. Target of the 8th Air Force has always been any factory that makes or assembles on the ground Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts that challenge the forts and libs and our own fighters in the air. When our bombers hit the fighter factory at Regensburg, the 8th Air Force slugged Hitler where it hurts. And then we shuttled on to Africa. Another 8th Air Force bombers have operated from African bases to hit the Hun in the belly. Twice our bombers have crossed the Danube to do their job. With the RAF, we have bombed Germany around the clock. Alone, the 8th has hit the Hun around the map. The smoking engine is a signal for all the Jerrys to queue up on a crippled bomber, like buzzards collecting over a tired horse in the desert. It's tough to fight through to the target. It's still tougher to hold her straight and level on the bombing run. The Jerrys watch your bomb bays open, and that's their signal for their most desperate attacks. But toughest of all is the fight to slug your way back through all the flak and fighters that the Hun sends up to ambush you on the run home. parachute going down, one of ours. The combat crews of ports and libs are glad to see. Our own fighters and the Spitfires of the RAF and finally the coast of England on their way home. But the Battle of Germany is not ended even then, because gas is always low on the home stretch. Desperately wounded airmen often fight to keep crippled bombers in the air. The demand for cool courage and leather nerves does not slacken with the sight of England. Planes must still be landed, and sometimes that's not easy. This homing thunderbolt tripped up on a shot-up tire, but at last, he's landed. Far more than just the 8th Air Force has been tested in the lofty Battle of Germany. Our whole way of life, our industrial strength, our planning, our character as a nation, all that has been tested here in what airmen call the big league. The young men in the combat crews, they have passed this testing time. Many airmen of the 8th wear the Purple Heart. And many Purple Hearts wear the oak leaf cluster, because it takes more than a single wound to ground these boys. The wounded only wonder, how long will it be before they can fly and fight again? The story of a mission comes tumbling out at the interrogation when nerves relax and stomachs stretch happily to hold hot coffee and Spam. And actually, the story of a mission goes on beyond the interrogation. British air-sea rescue launches and planes scour the channel of the North Sea to fish combat crews out of the drink. Combat crews that had to ditch their bombers before they could make it home. And on every field, as weary combat crews shuffle off to early beds, harassed engineering officers have a hasty job to do. Because up at Bomber Command, they may be cooking up another mission for tomorrow. And so, during the night, miracles must be performed on battle-damaged planes to get them ready for another job in the morning. 60% of all planes battle damaged after a rugged run is not rare for bombers of the 8th. Some of the bombers that do get home will never fly or fight again. But some of the bombers that crash land away from their bases do fly again. For instance, there was the story of Stella. She came home on one engine. She crashed and skidded to a stop. And that's where Air Service Command got to work. A mobile repair unit hit the road and took the men and the tools to patch up Stella. There was plenty of work to do on Stella before she would fly again. And while the men worked on Stella, bulldozers chewed out a hasty runway for Stella's wheel, for her new wheel. And this is the end of the story of Stella. But not really the end, but only a new beginning. Because Stella went home to have another crack at the Huns. The end of the story of a mission does not come until photo reconnaissance sends out the lonely prowling planes that carry no guns but only cameras to bring back the pictures that will tell Bomber Command, your job was well done. Or sometimes, sorry, but you didn't quite finish that target. You've got to go back again. And sometimes we're lucky enough to find an eyewitness to give the story of an 8th Air Force mission new headlines.
Corporal McLaughlin, RAMC, just back from Germany, saw U.S. bombers wipe out a Focke-Wulf factory.
Yes, at 7 minutes to 1, the air raid alarm sounded. And within 4 minutes from the time that it sounded, the planes were over us. Well, there's a main camp some few hundred yards from where we are, and the boys in there took their shirts off and started waving to the planes.
Well, did any of the boys up top respond to that?
Yes, they dropped their bombs. It was reckoned that they worked 24 hours a day in that plant of shifts. They did a shift with 2,000 people. So if there were 2,000 people in the place at the time, there must have been at least 1,500 of them under the wreckage. Every shot landed inside the drone. And I think myself, I agree with the Germans, it was one of the best raids that they'd ever seen.
We don't know what kind of a communique Goebbels put out on the Marienburg job. But if for once he told the truth, then the story should have read like this in the Nazi newspapers. The bombers of the U.S. 8th Air Force invaded Marienburg today, northeast of Berlin. 2 flying fortresses were shot down. Another German factory is missing.
Yes?
Here's your radiogram now, sir.
Go ahead.
It reads, Green Canadian production, Avro Lancaster bombers, confirmation effective as from today.
Okay. Hey, if you fellas heard the news, we're going to build 4 more bombers. Oh, yeah?
I tell you, it's true. We're going to build them right here in this plant.
The biggest long-range bomber in the world.
Yeah, it carries 8 tons of bombs. Sure, we can build them. Well, we couldn't have built them a couple of years ago, but we can now.
Yes, we can build the biggest bombers now. We've got the materials, aluminum from Arvida, nickel from Sudbury, magnesium from Haley, supply trains running day and night from distant raw material sources to the assembly plants. All we need now is the tools.
Sure, we can handle the job, but we've got to have machine tools and plenty of them. Do I need many? Brother, the tools I haven't got, you could just about squeeze into Varsity Stadium. I know they're scarce, but it takes 10,000 jigs and tools to turn out an aircraft the size of the Lancaster. There are 55,000 parts in that plane, and we hope to make more than half of them right here in the plant. Yes, we'll subcontract the rest all over the country. We've got parts coming in all day long.
From Toronto, Montreal, Brantford, Hamilton, day and night the telephones ring, the parts come rolling in, the blueprints from the drafting offices, 20 tons of them. Rushed in by bomber, worked over by the engineers and designers, broken down into production flow patterns. They don't look like much when you see them reduced to a few thin sheets of microfilm. But study them a little while, and you'll see that you'll need thousands of men to put that plane into regular production. Thousands of skills, and among them 300 of the rarest of all, the key men of mass production, tool makers.
All the tool makers you can get. Want to see me? Yes, Jack. I've got 30 tool makers, and I need 300. 300? Where are you going to get them? Can you spare me any men from production? Not real tool makers. Well, they don't have to be. If they can handle a drill or know how to handle a file, send them over. We'll make tool makers out of them.
And we made tool makers out of them. Farmers, laborers, men from converted industries, even housewives. And while we were training the men and women, while we were building all the jigs and tools we could, we went after the special machines we couldn't make.
Look, we're tooling up for Lancaster production, and we need farm milling machines. When can you make delivery? Priority? Yes, we've got a triple-plated grade A priority on everything we need.
That's how we went to work. First came the jigs and dies. For the aircraft, what the mold is to a coin. But as the new coin is only the first of thousands, so our first fuselage parts were soon followed by others on the flow production line. We call it a marriage when the 3 parts of the fuselage are joined for the first time. But it's not until the wings are joined that the plane can take off for battle. It's the 4 engines with their 5,000 horsepower that help her to outrange and outfly the enemy's fighters at 4 times the speed of an express train. She needs good engines and air screws in this final battle for the air of Europe. In that battle, she can't afford to have blind spots, so our girls check the tail turret that guards the lives of 7 men. No plane in the world carries more bombs than this. You can pack a whole Spitfire into its bomb bay. It carries 15,000 pounds of bombs, more than 3 Wellingtons together. It's a night bomber, and in a raid, it's got to be blacked out like a house. Seats in a battle plane don't have to be upholstered. They've got to be armored, and the men and women who build them carry the lives of the crew in their hands. We used to wonder if every small part was worth all the care and trouble we gave it. But then someone would remind us that a plane's whole mission depended on every part, and on the hidden parts most of all. Finally, we gave the ship her first name. Nothing fancy, just KB-700, a production number as plain and businesslike as the machine that was to carry the name into battle. Yes, she was nearly ready for battle. And as we looked at that long, slender plane, we thought of all the work we'd put into it, the months of effort, and now the reward. Some had doubted that the thing could be done, but we knew we could do it. A Canadian job, needing only a Canadian crew. And there they were, right in our plant, every one a veteran of more than 30 operational flights, some of them flown to Canada a few minutes after their return from a raid on Europe. We got talking to those boys, and we made friends with them. They'd come together from the coast, the prairies, the east, to make up a crew, just as we'd come from all over Canada to make up a plane. And somehow, as we talked, the plane became a cross-section and symbol of all Canada. The last day before the plane was ready for its flight, we had a party at the plant, open house for everyone. The girls and fellas showing each other the job they'd done on the big ship. And as the dawn broke over the roofs of the plant, we took our big plane out of her hangar slowly onto the gray concrete runway. Remember, this was to be our last contact with her. To us, she was a living thing. When the test flights were done, the crew took over, anxious to be on their way. They had picked up one more crew member in Canada, a white Scottish-Canadian, Saskatchewan-born. They called him B for Bambi. Slanting light of dawn, the men in the plane saw the farms of Ontario unfolding below them like a map.
First course, 087 degrees, 087 degrees.
Then, as the navigator set his course for England, the coast of the Maritimes gave way to the gray Atlantic. The boys kidded among themselves as they crossed the ice floes way out at sea.
I wonder who's taking Joyce out tonight. I don't know. She probably wasn't going to meet Mike anyway. Oh, yeah? You guys are just jealous because she wouldn't give you a towel.
It was cold at 7,000 feet over the Atlantic, above the clouds. At dawn, when the sun came out, they went down a few thousand feet to get warm. Then suddenly, the meadows of old England, as gently they eased her down to journey's end. Back at their stations, spot on at 10 a.m., with 350 gallons of gas still left in their tanks, to be welcomed by their senior officer overseas and by Canada's High Commissioner. Soon they heard Sir Stafford Cripps, Britain's Minister of Aircraft Production, telling them what England thought of their plane.
Recently, we've received from the hands of the Canadian workers their first Lancaster bomber to be sent to this country. It's a magnificent plane, up to the highest standards of production and performance. We hope it's the first of a very long series, which will fly quickly to the aerodromes of this country and load up with bombs for Germany.
And so it did when Johnny Fauquier from Ottawa, hero of many Canadian air battles, briefed the men of the Canadian Lancaster squadrons.
Our target tonight, Berlin. Germany is groggy and reeling. If you put the same effort into this attack tonight as you did into Hamburg, and you smashed Hamburg, you'll deal the enemy a blow from which they may well find it impossible to recover. Remember, bomb aimers, the pilots are depending on you to take them right into the aiming point. Now, it's up to you, men. Good luck to you, and off you go.
How's the kite, Chiefy? Hold that, sir. We're smarting off this trip. 2 to 1 on a watch out for scrub tonight. I'll take you 2 to 1. If we're scrubbed tonight, I hope it's in time to make the local pub. Beat the government out of an egg tonight.
The Battle of France, the Battle of Britain, the Battle of the Mediterranean, and now the Battle of Europe. 1,000 planes, 7,000 men, 5 million pounds of bombs hurled against targets 600 miles away. KB-700 took off into the English night, back home more than 2,000 miles away across the sea. We heard that she had a new name now, Q for Queenie.
Tonight, the radio stations of Germany have gone off the air again, as the largest air raid in history is moving to its climax.
Hey, listen to this, boss.
More than 1,000 British and Canadian heavy bombers are over Berlin again. And among them is the first Canadian-built Lancaster bomber.
Why, that's our baby. Hey, have you heard the news? Q for Queenie, bomb Berlin.
Q for Queenie, what's that?
Don't you remember? KB-700, our first baby.
On course. Okay. Oxygen on. Everybody getting oxygen? Bomb aimer okay. All is off okay, Q. Navigator doing fine. Engineer all set. Mapper okay. Rear gunner okay. On track. Okay, Bob.
tonight, tomorrow night, every night, till the job is done.
Oil is the driving power of war. The German oil position is tight. For the Luftwaffe, the submarines, for every offensive, Germany is consuming millions of tons of the highest grade fuel. Behind the front, oil is available only for vital needs: transport, industry, agriculture, shipping. In 1942, the net production of oil in Axis Europe and its consumption were about the same, 16 million tons. Stocks are low. At most, no more than 2 million tons are available for emergency use. Therefore, at the present time, any extensive break in production would have serious, almost immediate consequences for the German Reich. Destruction of only 15 targets can affect this break because of the nature of the European oil industry. German sources of crude oil fall far short of her needs. In her drive to the east, Germany seized the oil fields of Romania, but failed to reach the Near East and the Caucasus. Of the total oil consumed in Axis Europe in 1942, 30% had to be produced synthetically by two main processes: Bergius hydrogenation and Fischer-Tropsch synthesis. The bulk of this is produced by the Bergius process in only 15 hydrogenation plants. Their destruction would mean the loss of 4 million tons, the amount they produced in 1942. It would also mean the loss of a potential 1.5 million tons, the only significant increase in prospect for German oil supplies for 1943. The hydrogenation process produces oil from any coal, tar, or oil feed. Beginning with pulverized lignite carried in heavy oil, the feed is compressed and mixed with hydrogen, passes through a heat exchanger into the reaction chamber, where hydrogenation takes place in the presence of a catalyst. Gas oils are formed, pass back through the heat exchanger, giving off much of their heat to the fresh feed. Then they go into a cooler where the excess hydrogen is taken off to be used again, and finally arrive at the fractionation unit. Here, a poor grade crude oil is the main end product of the first cycle, which begins with lignite. This is recycled as feed. At the end of the second cycle, it comes out of the fractionating unit mainly as gasoline and middle oil. Recycling this middle oil results in maximum production of gasoline. Hydrogenation has the great advantage of producing the most important oil products in the proportion wanted. Destruction of the hydrogenation plants would therefore deprive the German oil economy of its great flexibility in adapting supplies to needs. 5 of the plants now produce 80% of Germany's aviation gasoline. Their elimination could be met in a short time by switching over the other plants to aviation fuel. If all 15 were destroyed, however, Germany would have to produce aviation fuel by other means, and it is doubtful that she could reach more than half of present production. Most of the plants are well inside the 800-mile radius of London. The Italian plants are 500 miles from American bases in North Africa. Built near coal supplies, many of the hydrogenation plants have been camouflaged.
Their exact location and plans, however, are known. In bombing these plants, the most vital spot is usually the large compressor house. Other aiming points in the vital area are hydrogen-making units, vulnerable to secondary explosions, high-pressure reaction chambers, the boiler and powerhouse. Intense heat from attendant fires would spread the damage to this equipment. For a few plants, such equipment might be replaced in 6 to 9 months. But if all were destroyed at one time, they could not be brought back into operation for several years. If, in addition, the important oil refineries of Europe were eliminated, the consequences for Germany would be catastrophic. Over half the crude oil of Europe is processed in the 12 Romanian refineries at Ploiești. If these were destroyed, the Romanian crude could be transported to some 17 modern refineries, most of them in Italy and southern France, now idle because of the blockade. The destruction of all 29 of these refineries, in addition to the 15 hydrogenation plants, would disintegrate the German war economy. High-speed machines are possible because of ball bearings, roller bearings, and other anti-friction bearings. The greater the speed, the greater the need for these bearings. At highest speeds, precision requirements reach extreme limits. Tolerances as close as 1/1,000,000th of an inch have been achieved. The gyros in torpedoes, for example, whirl at very high speeds. A flaw in a tiny steel ball makes the bearing useless. The torpedo has 19 bearings. It cannot operate without ball bearings. To strike at ball bearings is to strike at the submarine. In each bearing assembly, there are numerous little balls. An oil compressor has 7 assemblies. A jeep has 33 bearings. A medium tank, 125. A submarine, 616. And a flying fortress, some 3,500. After a time, bearings lose their precision. Spares are an absolute necessity, needs ranging from 25% to over 200% of original bearings. Today, all anti-friction bearings go to war. 40% of tonnage to aircraft, 31% to other Army equipment, tanks, guns, and trucks, 14% to Navy equipment, torpedoes, engines, guns, 4% to Lend-Lease for Allied arms, 11% to industrial needs for the war, machine tools, railroads, steel and food machinery. Bearing stocks are hard to maintain. There are thousands of types and sizes. Germany began the war with actual shortage. Germany today is believed to have no reserves of anti-friction bearings. Production goes direct to assembly and then to use. The production of bearings is a highly complicated, highly specialized process, vulnerable at many points. Ball bearings have 4 elements: the inner and outer races or rings, the retainer, and the steel balls. High carbon chrome alloy steel is used.
Rings are cut to thickness, bored, ground rough and semi-finished, hardened, ground again, and polished. These machines are specially designed and custom built. This end grinder, this cutting and kneading machine, first step in making steel balls, these finishers and polishers are all special purpose machines. Under the best conditions, they might take up to 1.5 years to replace. Even the commercially built machines are difficult to replace. These automatic machining screws, these turret lathes, Nortons, Fay lathes are all scarce machine tools, and a large factory has rows of them. Precision in manufacture is paramount. At every step, gauges are used, scattered throughout the plant in every department. These instruments make possible the Norden bomb sight by testing tolerances of 1/1,000,000 of an inch, easily damaged, difficult to replace. Practically all the manufacturing steps depend upon abrasives. Emery wheels are easily broken, highly vulnerable to even the smallest bombs. Their loss would paralyze the plants. If replacements were not available, the plants could not function. A simultaneous attack on the grinding wheels and abrasives industry would pay high dividends. These bearings are the catalysts of speed and power in mechanized war. Germany makes 250,000 bearings every day, 1/2 of all productive capacity in Europe. France adds 20%, and Italy 13%. The production of neutral countries is probably unobtainable. Germany's productive capacity, with France and Italy, is 400,000 bearings daily, about half of American daily production. This is the target. German production is concentrated. 3 plants at Schweinfurt, population 50,000, produce 42% of Axis production. The plants are close to the river and the railway, good aiming points. A plant in Stuttgart adds 7%. And one in Erkner, near Berlin, 7%. This plant produces aircraft bearings and is therefore an important target, though a difficult one. In France, 2 plants in Paris produce 10% of Axis output. One at Annecy adds 5%. In Italy, 2 plants near Turin add 15%. These 10 plants account for over 5/6 of all Axis production. And they are well within bombing range from London. All are supplying direct to assembly lines. Destruction means wide industrial stoppage, no bearings for aircraft engines, no bearings for locomotives or auto engines, ordnance, machine tools. Special precision tools take months to build. Recovery would take a long time. Ball and roller bearing factories are essential to the German industrial strength. They are highly vulnerable, and their loss would seriously handicap production and replacement of German war equipment.
A major debate over World War II, controversial to this day, concerns the Allied strategic bombing campaign against Germany. The issue in question was Britain's policy of attacking German cities by night. U.S. policy was to concentrate attacks on specific military and industrial targets by day. Area bombing, or city busting as it was called, was designed to break the morale of the German people and force the surrender of Nazi Germany. It was based on a popular pre-war theory that argued that wholesale bombing attacks would enable nations to achieve ultimate victory without resorting to costly ground campaigns. With this in mind, the RAF Bomber Command launched 3 major bombing attacks on Germany in 1943. The last was a sustained assault on the German capital of Berlin. Like previous RAF attacks, the bombing of Berlin caused considerable damage. But the German people endured. There was no marked weakening of morale. As a result, the Allies were forced to fight a long and costly ground campaign. Germany did not surrender until Soviet troops took Berlin after a bitter 2-week battle. Britain had successfully endured a similar campaign, the Luftwaffe's bombing offensive against London and other British cities during the winter of 1940 and 1941. There was no reason to think air bombing would work any better against the Germans. From early 1942 until the end of the war in Europe, Sir Arthur Harris was head of the RAF Bomber Command. He believed in the theory of air power, which was developed just after the end of World War I, notably by Italian General Giulio Douhet. Douhet was inspired by the strategic bombing offensives of 1914 through 1918, especially those by German airships and aircraft against Britain. Douhet and others argued that bombing on its own could win wars. It could pinpoint the enemy's seat of government, industry, and the morale of its people. The RAF's Harris set out to prove this theory. Before Harris took over command of the strategic bombing offensive, the RAF struggled with too many severe disadvantages to prove air theorists right. First, the RAF Bomber Command did not have enough heavy bombers to mount a sustained, powerful offensive on Germany. Second, RAF bombers were forced to operate by night. They did not have long-range escort fighters, nor the defensive armament to repel German day fighters. At the time, night operations made accurate navigation and bombing difficult to achieve. Third, the Germans had built up comprehensive belts of defenses using radar, searchlights, and flak guns. Known as the Kammhuber Line, after the Luftwaffe general who set up these anti-aircraft belts, they protected the lanes British bombers would use to approach Germany. The Germans also had an increasingly effective night fighting force. This made it doubtful that the RAF Bomber Command could contribute to the war against Germany. Soon after Harris took command in February 1942, he received 2 new pieces of equipment. The first was a new navigation system called G. G could pinpoint an aircraft's position using a specially gridded map combined with radio transmissions from ground stations. It radically improved a bomber crew's chances of finding its target at night. Harris was also given a new bomber, the Avro Lancaster. The Lancaster could carry 14,000 pounds of bombs over 1,600 miles. It would prove to be one of the outstanding bombers of the war. With enough of these airplanes, Harris believed he could prove the bomber school of air theory right and win the war. To get Churchill and his war cabinet to provide him with the aircraft he needed, Harris decided to stage a spectacular demonstration. He borrowed planes from wherever he could and mounted 3 1,000 bomber raids against German targets in the early summer of 1942. The 1,000 bomber raids were a remarkable achievement and impressed the British government. But it was impossible to increase the production of bombers overnight. It was some time before the strength of Harris's frontline bombers was sufficient and his ideas could be put into action. In 1943, Harris began to receive the quantity of heavy bombers he needed to launch a sustained attack on Germany. In January of that year, he was given official backing by Churchill and Roosevelt at their Casablanca Strategic Conference. They agreed that bombing Germany to fatally weaken her ability to wage war was an essential prerequisite to Allied re-entry to Europe. The decision appeared to reflect an acceptance of Harris's bombing strategy. U.S. bombers attacked by day. RAF Bomber Command would continue its offensive by night. The crews would concentrate on area bombing, or city busting. This had 2 objectives. First, it would disrupt German industry by bombing workers out of their homes and causing absenteeism. Second, and even more ruthless, the offensive was meant to totally demoralize the German people by inflicting widespread devastation and casualties. During 1943, Harris would wage 3 distinct battles against German urban areas. He warned the German people,
"They sowed the wind, and now they are going to reap the whirlwind."
Harris's attacks culminated with World War II's toughest and most severe test of the RAF. But the plan did not destroy the German people's will to fight. Harris would overreach himself in what became one of the most controversial blunders of the war. The first of Sir Arthur Harris's major bombing attacks against Germany began in March 1943. The target was Western Germany's main industrial area, the Ruhr. Harris maintained the campaign for 4 months. During that period, he mounted 43 major raids against German targets. 2/3 were against the Ruhr itself. The remainder were designed to prevent the Luftwaffe from concentrating its night fighter force in the Ruhr. Harris claimed to have extensively damaged German industry, but the campaign had little effect on Hitler's war machine. Munitions production increased during 1943. Moreover, the German night fighting force became increasingly effective, despite Harris's efforts to disperse it. It was soon shooting down more aircraft than German flak guns. During the last month of the battle, German night fighters were so effective that availability of British bombers and crews fell by 15%. These growing losses forced Harris to stop the battle in early July. Despite his bomber casualties, Harris turned to another target within 2 weeks, Germany's northern port city of Hamburg. Facing 4 RAF raids by night and 2 by the U.S. 8th Air Force by day, the heart of Hamburg was torn out. At least 45,000 inhabitants perished, many in firestorms created by the heavy use of incendiary bombs. Hundreds of thousands were left homeless. But among the German people, the bombing led to as much anger as it did shock. The determination to fight on remained strong. Doubts began to surface that sustained bombing alone could achieve victory. During the attacks on Hamburg, the RAF Bomber Command introduced a new weapon, window. It used strips of aluminum foil cut to a certain size. Dropped by bombers, these confused German radar. German night fighter controllers were blinded by window, and bomber losses fell significantly. But the Germans quickly revised their tactics. Night fighters began to roam freely rather than being tightly controlled from the ground. This made them even more effective than before window. The quick adaptation was another indication that German resistance was as strong as ever. Harris thought differently. Mistakenly encouraged by the successful assault on Hamburg, Harris turned to another target. He believed the destruction of the German capital of Berlin would bring the war to a speedy end. Toward the end of August 1943, the RAF Bomber Command conducted a dress rehearsal. 3 attacks were made against Berlin, but out of nearly 1,650 heavy bombers, 126 were shot down. This represented a loss rate of 7.7%, unacceptably high. It demonstrated the German air defenses made a remarkable recovery from the damage inflicted on them by window. It should have been a warning to Harris that waging a campaign against the very heart of Germany could be a costly blunder. But he was only prepared to delay the opening of the main assault until the onset of winter, when the nights became longer. Harris had other reasons to delay the launch of his offensive against Berlin. He wanted to wait until all his bombers had been equipped with new electronic aids. One was a new navigation device, H2S, called Home Sweet Home by the crews. This was a radar that looked downward and scanned the terrain the aircraft flew over. It was very effective over terrain with clear natural features like coastlines and large rivers. It made the navigator's job considerably easier. But H2S did not work well over a large urban sprawl like Berlin. Harris hoped that the U.S. 8th Air Force would join his offensive against the German capital. But the U.S. Air Force was still recovering from its first really deep penetration mission into Germany against ball bearing plants at Schweinfurt and a fighter factory at Regensburg. Unescorted U.S. bombers had been badly mauled by German day fighters. More heavy casualties were sustained in the attack on Schweinfurt in October. This and the need to transfer U.S. bombers to Italy meant that the 8th Air Force was not ready to attack Berlin. The RAF's Harris was impatient to begin his offensive. He decided to go it alone to prove his point that bombing could win wars. He began his main assault on Berlin on the night of November 18, 1943. It was an encouraging start. Only 9 of 444 bombers failed to return. But hopes that British bombers could achieve a major victory over the Third Reich would soon be dashed. Worsening weather and stronger German air defenses would increase the bomber loss rate, not weaken German morale. The extent of Harris's miscalculation would soon be revealed. The British mounted 7 more attacks against Berlin before the end of 1943. But visibility worsened. Combined with more effective German night fighter tactics, this pushed the British casualty rate higher. The strain on the British bomber crews began to tell. Many became fatalistic about their chances of survival. They had to fly 30 missions before they completed their operational tours and received a rest from combat flying. But Harris remained undeterred. In January 1944, in even more adverse weather conditions, Harris launched 5 more attacks on Berlin. The bomber loss rate rose to over 6% of the aircraft involved. Berlin suffered enormous damage, but the city was twice the size of Hamburg and could better absorb the destruction. Berliners endured the bombing with the same stoicism Londoners had during the Blitz 3 years earlier. The innate discipline of the German people and the rigid grip of the Nazi regime helped ensure the preservation of morale. During the first half of February 1944, the weather was so terrible that no attacks could be launched on Berlin. When British bombers returned to Berlin on the night of February 15th, they lost 42 out of 891 bombers. It would be 5 weeks before RAF bombers would make another attack. This time, over 9% failed to return. Sir Arthur Harris was finally forced to accept that Berlin was too difficult a target. He had been unable to prove that area bombing could win a war. At the end of March, General Dwight Eisenhower reassigned Allied strategic bombing forces in Britain. They would provide direct support for the landings in Normandy. Before Eisenhower took control, Harris carried out one more major attack against a German city, Nuremberg. On the night of March 30th, 1944, at least 106 out of 782 bombers were shot down. It was the RAF Bomber Command's worst casualty rate in all its major raids of World War II. Harris had tried to win the war on his own, but blundered. In his determination to prove the bombing theorists right, he refused to acknowledge until it was too late that the RAF Bomber Command was paying a heavy price in plane and crew losses. He overlooked the fact that London itself had survived a sustained German air assault. Between September and November 1940, there was only one night when the German bombers were not over the British capital. The German Blitz lasted for 8 long months, but did not break the British spirit. Against this backdrop, there was no reason to believe that Berliners would react any differently to the British bombing their city. The bombing did not break the morale of the German people. The war continued for another year. London and Berlin both proved that the theory of city busting on its own could not win wars. But if Harris had mounted a sustained campaign against German communications and oil, as the American air commanders had wanted, the resulting destruction would have stopped Germany much earlier. When the Allies did use this tactic, Germany began to collapse, bringing the war to an end.